I'll never forget the night I stayed alone at my grandfather's old house. He had passed away a few years back, and the house remained in our family as a summer getaway. It was an old, creaky place in a remote village, far away from the bustling city. My family asked me to go there for a night, just to check on the house, make sure everything was okay, and that no one had broken in. I arrived that evening, settled in with a book and some movies, trying to keep my nerves at bay. The wind was howling outside, making the old wooden walls creak. I wasn't too concerned, though. The house was old, and the wind tended to make strange noises in such places. Around 2 a.m., I heard a faint tapping sound coming from outside. At first, I thought it was just the wind knocking something against the wall, but the tapping was too rhythmic, too deliberate. It didn't sound like something natural. Curious but uneasy, I went to the window and peeked outside. No one was there, just the pitch-black darkness and the howling wind. I tried to calm myself down and went back to bed. A few minutes later, the tapping started again, louder this time, and it was coming from the front door. My heart began to race. I grabbed my phone and tiptoed to the door, listening closely. From the peephole, I could see nothing but the empty porch. I decided not to open the door. Instead, I backed away, hoping it would stop. But then, the tapping turned into the sound of footsteps, heavy footsteps walking back and forth on the porch. It was unmistakable now. Someone or something was out there. With shaking hands, I called the police and waited anxiously, praying for the footsteps to stop. When the police arrived, they found no one. They checked the surroundings but didn't see any signs of forced entry or disturbance. But I knew, deep down, that something was there that night, something that didn't belong in this world. It was a warm summer night, and I was home alone at my parents' place. They had gone out of town for a few days, leaving me in charge of the house. The house was large and old, and every little sound seemed to echo louder when you were alone. On the first night, I was sitting on the couch watching TV when I heard a faint scratching noise coming from the basement. At first, I thought it was the pipes or maybe a small animal that had gotten into the house. But the more I listened, the more it sounded like something, or someone, was deliberately scratching the floor or the walls. I tried to brush it off, thinking I was just being paranoid. I turned off the TV and went to bed, but just as I was drifting off to sleep, the scratching noise returned. This time it was louder, clearer, and seemed to be moving closer, as if something was crawling its way up from the basement. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I got out of bed, heart pounding, and slowly made my way to the basement door. I opened it and flipped on the light, shining it down into the dark, musty basement. There was nothing there, no signs of movement, no animals, nothing. Feeling a bit foolish, I turned off the light and went back upstairs. But as soon as I lay down, the scratching started again, louder and closer than before. This time, it sounded like it was right beneath my feet. Whatever it was trying to get out of the basement. I stayed up the entire night, unable to sleep, listening to that relentless scratching. When my parents came home the next day, I told them what happened. They didn't seem surprised. Apparently, they had heard similar noises before but never bothered to investigate. This happened a few years ago when I was living in a small apartment in the city. I was a college student at the time, and it wasn't unusual for me to be alone late at night, either studying or watching something on TV to relax. The apartment was cozy, just one bedroom and a small living room, perfect for someone like me who didn't need much space. It was around 11 p.m., and I was lying on the couch reading when I heard it for the first time, a faint, deep breathing sound. I paused, thinking maybe it was the neighbors or perhaps some noise from the street. I lived in a busy part of town, so strange sounds were common. But this was different. It wasn't coming from outside. It was close, too close, like it was coming from right outside my front door. I tried to ignore it, telling myself that it was nothing. But as the minutes passed, the breathing became more pronounced. It was slow and deliberate, like someone standing just behind my door, taking heavy breaths. My stomach twisted in knots. What if someone was there? I stood up quietly and walked over to the door. My heart was pounding as I leaned in to listen more closely. There it was again, the breathing. It was unmistakable now. Someone was definitely standing outside my door, breathing deeply, almost like they were trying to stay calm or control themselves. I felt a chill run down my spine. I thought about looking through the peephole, but I was too scared of what I might see. My mind raced with possibilities. Was it a neighbor playing a prank? Was it someone trying to break in? Or could it be something worse? After a few seconds, I forced myself to look through the peephole, even though my hands were shaking. To my surprise, there was no one there. The hallway was completely empty. Confused, I stood there for a moment, wondering if I had just imagined the whole thing. I slowly turned away from the door, trying to shake off the unease. But just as I sat back down on the couch, I heard it again. This time, it was louder. The breathing was back, and it was closer, like someone was now standing right against the door, their breaths echoing through the small space between us. I felt a surge of fear. This was no joke. Whoever, or whatever, was on the other side of that door was still there, and they weren't leaving. I took a deep breath and decided to open the door, hoping that confronting whatever was out there would end this nightmare. I swung the door open quickly, but the hallway was empty. Again. No one. But something was off. A strange smell hit me, one that hadn't been there before. It was foul, like rotting meat or garbage left out for too long. My stomach turned, and I quickly closed the door, locking it behind me. I stood there for a minute, trying to calm myself down. Maybe it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. Maybe the smell was from the garbage in the hallway, and the breathing was just the wind, or some strange apartment noise. But deep down, I knew none of that was true. I went back to the couch, but I couldn't relax. I kept listening for the breathing, but it didn't come again, at least, not for a while. Just when I thought it was over, the sound returned, but this time it was different. It wasn't coming from the hallway anymore. It was inside. The breathing was now coming from somewhere inside the apartment. I froze. My mind went blank. The sound wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. Deep, slow breaths, as if someone was standing in the corner of the room, watching me. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't move. I didn't know what to do. I slowly backed into my bedroom, locked the door, and sat in the corner of the room, listening to the steady breathing coming from the other side of the wall. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there, shaking, until the first light of dawn crept through the window. That's when the breathing stopped, as if it had never been there. When the sun came up, I searched the entire apartment, but there was no sign of anyone or anything. No one could have come in. I checked all the locks, all the windows, everything was secure. But that didn't change what I had heard. I moved out of that apartment a few months later. I couldn't stand living there anymore, not after what happened. I never found out who, or what, was behind that breathing, but I'll never forget the sound. Even now, years later, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, certain I can still hear it.